When did the symptoms of anxiety first start for you?
I started to notice that I was having anxiety when I had maybe about 4 years sober. I didn't think that I struggled with anxiety before that, but like looking back on it now that I've had the experience of like being diagnosed with anxiety and panic disorder, actually, I can see now how things that I was experiencing when I was younger and things that led to my addiction were actually anxiety, and I just wasn't able to like assign that word to them necessarily.
You know, for 4 years is a lot of time.
Yeah.
Without it.
Yeah.
So, what like brought it on in hindsight?
You know, I couldn't say for sure. I've never had somebody say like emphatically this is what really kicked off your anxiety, but they talk about how like the drug is the symptom, you know, of something deeper, of this like spiritual malady. And for like the first year to year and a half that I was sober, I was super involved in the program. I found a fellowship that I felt really comfortable in, and I had found like a home to be in and a really great fellowship. And I was really, really happy. And then I got into a relationship, and it was a really, really sick and abusive relationship. And I stayed in that relationship until I was almost 5 years sober. And I think that in the beginning, he would get really jealous that I was going to meetings where there was guys. So I started pulling away from the fellowship that I had built. And I would go to other meetings that were like more with women, but it's like, really, I think a big thing in sobriety is like you have to find your people. Like you have to find the place where you feel like you're at home. So like I continued to like be involved in the program, but I just didn't feel like I belonged anymore. And like the fellowship that I was in, you know, other things in the relationship, like it started to get really like mentally abusive, and then it started to get really physically abusive. And I just like wasn't willing to like look at it. Like I just was like, oh, he's gonna change, like things are gonna get better, instead of just like really looking inward and saying like, why do I feel like I deserve this? Like, why am I staying in this? I started to feel like more and more mentally and emotionally uncomfortable until like it finally escalated to like severe panic attacks.
There's definitely, I mean, I can see just from my own experience, just from listening, you know, is like, that would be anxiety inducing.
Yeah.
That would, you know, but so now that you've made a change, not in that relationship anymore, does anxiety still come up? Because what a lot of people talk about with mental health disorders is that, and why they're so similar to substance abuse disorders and can be, you know, treated at these, you know, amazing centers like dual diagnosis programs, is because they're chronic. So you could potentially be dealing with it for your whole life. So like after that relationship ended, you know, you have 9 years now, does anxiety still come up?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like I was saying, I can look back and see how I had always been affected by anxiety, but I just didn't recognize that that's what it is. And it's the same thing now. Like I see now, having had those experiences, how the things that I didn't realize were related to anxiety, like I still have it. And something that I have too is, I don't know if you've ever had a panic attack. They are so scary. Like I was talking about like an experience that I had where I drove myself to an emergency room and I sat in the lobby, and I just sat in the lobby, and this nurse came out and was talking to me, and she was like, "Are you waiting for somebody? Like you've been here for a long time." And I was like, just bawling, like hysterical. And I was like, no, I just know that I'm going to die. Like, I don't know why, I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I just know that I'm going to die. And I was like, I need to be here so that like, just if I have a stroke or a heart attack or like whatever is about to happen to me, like I'm with doctors. And she was like, okay, like, let's admit you. And she was like, do you know what panic attacks are? And I was like, no, you know, so.
And that was in recovery.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was, I mean, shoot, my sobriety date is in March, and that was in October, right before my 5 years. Wow. So it was like really close to my 5 years sober. Like having had like such really severe like panic attacks that actually like required hospitalization. I get anxiety about anxiety now. Like I get really scared when I start to notice like, you know, just little things like where you get like kind of fidgety and stuff like that. I'll be like, oh no, like please don't have a panic attack. And I get anxiety about that. So yeah, I mean, it's chronic. Like I'll probably deal with it for the rest of my life, but it's manageable.
No, because, you know, in my own experience with anxiety and taking medication for it, luckily, and we were talking about this the other day with Nick, you know, I've gotten I don't have to take medication anymore, thank God. A lot of therapy and a lot of work into that, coping mechanisms. But I never had a panic attack in recovery. I mean, I've only had a year.
Okay.
I only have 14 months of sobriety. But that anxiety, I don't know if it was there prior to. Like, and I think that's why coming up in this conversation, the question will be so interesting. Is like, what came first, And for me, like, the panic attacks came when I was using or very compromised by mentally and mind and mood altering substances. So I've never had a panic attack or severe anxiety in recovery. But I mean, that it came, because of the decisions that I had been making and the substances that I was using and the damage that I was doing to my body and my brain. It's something that you're dealing with and you've noticed now in the past. Can you kind of finish up what you were saying about where it started now that you've looked back on it?
Yeah, so now that I've had the experience of saying, like, I know that I act this way because of anxiety. I know that, like, I feel this way because of anxiety. I can look back and see how my whole life I was struggling with anxiety, but, like, I didn't know. Like I said, it's just like I couldn't really put that word to it because I didn't know that's what I was feeling. But, like, I was always like a nail biter and I was always really fidgety and I had problems concentrating. I'll obsess about things. Like if I have an interaction with somebody that I feel didn't go well, like I have had to have, because of the climate we're in, like I've had some difficult conversations with people recently about things that are going on in the world. And like, if I feel like I've upset somebody, I'll literally, like, I can't sleep. I think about it nonstop. Like I think about all the things that I should have said or like would have said and like stuff like that. So also things that would happen when I started to have like really, really severe anxiety in anxiety and sobriety is I started to have severe rage issues. I was having like really bad bouts of depression. Like I remember talking to my mom 5 years sober and I just like, I had this like pit in my stomach like all the time. And like, I just didn't know I didn't know how to like address this like massive emotional baggage that I had like built up over 5 years, And when you're sober, like you don't even have anything to like cope with it. Like you're not, putting drugs on top of it to try to minimize the feelings even. Like you just really feel these things. And it was like that for so long that I just was like, I don't really know where to turn. Like I don't know how to address this at this point. I don't know how to like feel better. And I remember talking to my mom and saying like, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to feel happy again. So it was, I can look back and see how also like when I was a kid, like I would have like fits of rage. Like I would break things. I would get into fights and I would struggle with feelings of feeling like not good enough and feelings of feeling unhappy and feelings of feeling like overwhelmed. Like I didn't know like where to make a start on like moving forward with my life. And I think a lot of those things are similar to what I felt when I started having really bad panic attacks and they're anxiety related, but I never really recognized that.
Did you ever seek help for those symptoms?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I definitely did. It was kind of weird at first because like it all kicked off with like a panic attack. And then there was the first panic attack that I had. And then I was having panic attacks like several times a week for probably about a month, like really severe panic attacks. And I thought there was something like medically wrong with me.
Yeah, because it was that much of a experience.
Yeah, well, also something about panic attacks. I remember my doctor explaining this to me is like, there's anxiety where you have feelings of impending doom and like you overthink things and there's a lot that goes into anxiety. And he was like, panic attacks are kind of different because like you're in flight or flight, like full adrenaline. And it's crazy. Like I try to explain it to be like my boyfriend has no idea what it's like to have anxiety, but I had a panic attack a couple months ago. I don't know what triggered it, but it's just, it happens. Like it'll happen occasionally and I know how to deal with them now. But I was trying to explain to him, like, we went to the Salt River and like, I guess it wasn't a couple months ago. It must have been last summer, but we went to the Salt River and I think I got dehydrated. So like my heart rate like kicked up. And then in my mind, I was like, oh, is this like dehydration or I have a heart condition? So I was like, is there something wrong with my heart? And then I realized that we were like out in the middle of nature. Like if I had a heart attack, for example, I wouldn't be able to get to a doctor in time. And I just started freaking out. And I was like, what would happen if I needed a doctor? And he was just like, oh, you don't. And I was like, but what if I needed a doctor? And he was like, don't freak yourself out. Like, you don't need a doctor. And I was like, I am already freaking out. And like, I need to talk this through, you know? Fortunately, there was like a nurse in our group. So she like came over to me and she was like, we have cell phones and dry bags. Like they have a patrol in this area. Like if you needed help, you would absolutely be able to get it. And like immediately I was like, okay, thank you. I'm good. Like I know I was like tripping. I don't know what would have happened if she wasn't there. But so yeah, so initially I definitely thought that it was like a medical issue and like the panic tells you, you know, like I'm dying. And like you try to explain to people like it's not just like a feeling of being afraid or a feeling of impending doom. Like with panic attacks, like you actually literally think you're dying for whatever reason you make up in your mind that day. So I sought medical attention from doctors and they did like a bunch of blood work and tests and stuff that, you know, to try to determine if there was anything medical that had kicked it off. And then once they determined that it was, you know, a panic disorder and anxiety related, I did do therapy and I did get into work in the program. Like I did my steps over, I did therapy. I actually got really involved in Codependence Anonymous because like a lot of it had stemmed from codependency issues. So yeah, like I saw all kinds of different help. Like I was just like, somebody help me, like I'm crazy. I don't know, like being in recovery, I didn't personally feel all that comfortable taking, you know, like Ativan or Xanax. I did have to take it a couple times when I was having such severe panic attacks. Did you know if you take Ativan when you need it, you don't feel high? How weird is that?
Because you're probably just already so stimulated.
Yeah.
It's like
I was like, okay, so this nurse was like, we need to give you something to get your heart rate down. Because my heart rate was like, one of the times that I was hospitalized, my heart rate was like 180 when I was like laying down. And she was like, this is dangerous. Like, we need to get your heart rate down. So I was like, okay, I'll take, but it's, you got to give me the pill form. I was like, no IV Ativan. Like, I'll take half. And if I need the other half, I'll take the other half. And I was like, crap, I got to find a ride home because I'm not going to be able to drive. And then like about an hour later, I was like, oh, look at that. Like, I feel fine. I don't feel high because I actually needed it.
You used it for its specific purpose.
I was like, wow, what an experience I'm having.
You had Ativan before, right? Your diagnosis, right? Or the doctor gave you that, right?
You mean, had I ever taken it to get high?
Have you ever had it to get high?
Oh, yes.
Okay, see, like this is
I
our next question.
abused.
Did you use drugs to self-medicate?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, drugs feel good anyway, but, like, I definitely always abused downers, and I would mix a lot of downers, and some things that I abused really heavily were Klonopin and Ambien, and heroin, and alcohol, but always downers, and again, like, I couldn't have said at the time, like, oh, I'm doing this because I'm so anxious naturally, and I just feel like I can't ever relax.
Right.
But looking back at it, like I hated uppers because like when I took uppers, like I was just like a crazy anxiety mess. So I think that like having that predisposition to being anxious really, like I sought out downers because it is really exhausting being so high strung all the time.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the other questions too that's so important about, you know, why we use drugs in the first place is like this idea of self-medicating. You know, our feelings are uncomfortable. I will medicate myself to feel differently. You know, whether it's pain or some other form of uncomfortable emotion, you know, so you were unconsciously addressing a, you know, medical issue with your own form of medication.
Yeah, I do think it was subconscious, but I definitely think that, especially because when I think back about my experience using, like, you know, when I first got into it, like when I would first experiment with like alcohol or when it was just weed, like I remember it felt fun and everything, but like it felt like I could breathe for like the first time, you know, like it just felt like all of those like things that I was constantly worrying about that I didn't even really recognize that I was constantly worrying about, like, fell away. And I was finally just able to be like, okay. And, like, you know, relax for a few hours. So, yeah, I don't think I could have said it at the time, but looking back on it, I absolutely think I was, like, self-medicating anxiety issues. It's like, it makes it so much worse when you're just like, I didn't know. Also, I'm from, like, a military family. So, like, we didn't talk about our feelings. Like, we didn't, like, God, we were, like, really, we didn't even really, like, say I love you or, like, hug. Like, it was, you know, we all have really, like, emotionally distant relationships from each other in my family, which is fine. It's just because, you know, like, my parents grew up both in abusive households and then joined the military, you know, so, like, that was just how they knew to live. So that's how we all lived, and, like, that's fine. But, you know, like, I didn't know that I could just be like, I feel unhappy all the time. Like, I didn't know that I could just say, like, I feel like I'm crawling out of my skin, you know? And, like, we didn't have the kinds of conversations where, like, those things might come up naturally. And, like, you didn't do things like get therapy, you know? So when I finally found something that I was like, oh my God, like, I can just exist, then it was like all of the time that I didn't have that, it was like twice as bad as it ever was, because it's like I knew that there was a way to escape it. And I was constantly like, oh, I just need to feel better. Like, I just need to feel okay. So I think once I realized that, like, the drugs and alcohol worked for that, it made it so much worse when I didn't have them.
Yeah, it's talking about your addiction now. Like, when did it become like a problem, like, for you? You're after self.
I wanted to kind of get to, when did you start realizing that this other form of medication was working in the therapy and the, you know, in the other stuff, you know, that's later. But so, like, when did it start to work, the drugs? When did you start to realize that was working? And then, you know, how did that lead to a lifestyle? And then when did that lifestyle stop working?
I mean, I think that I noticed pretty quickly that, like, the drugs and alcohol worked for that, you know. And this is something that I talk about if I share, is like, if I wasn't an addict, like, if I just abused substances but I wasn't truly an addict, then, like, cool, because tons of people have a glass of wine at the end of the day to relax, you know, like, however, there's, like, the anxiety, and then there's also, like, the addictive personality, where it was like, as soon as I was like, this works, I was like, great, I want it every day, all the time. I also, I think that this comes from, like, the addictive personality versus, like, the anxiety, but I think the addict part of me is that voice that says, like, if we can feel this good from this, how much better can we feel from this? And then, like, what about this? And, like, what if we do more? You know? So, like, that's kind of how the drug addiction progressed. And I would try things, and I would be like, well, you never knew that this would make you feel so good. So, like, you gotta try this. Like, what if it's even better? You know? So that's how I ended up, like, experimenting with different things. And I ended up getting into, like, heroin. And, I mean, like, I would say that my worst drug and alcohol issues were heroin and actually alcohol, which is kind of different. I think, like, a lot of people my age, or I was 20 years old when I got sober, for the, like, when I finally, like, actually did get sober. And I don't think many 20-year-olds have the experience of knowing, like, I am definitely an alcoholic. But I did. And that's because, like, I would do heroin until the, you know, emotional and, like, life circumstances of keeping up that lifestyle were, like, crushing. Where, you know, like, I couldn't keep stealing. Like, I couldn't hold down a job. I couldn't pay bills. Like, my car was impounded. I couldn't keep stealing from people. Panhandling didn't work because I was, like, obviously a drug addict. You know, just, like, the circumstances, like, it's emotionally, I don't know a good word for it, you know, bad.
Destructive?
Emotionally destructive. Yeah, like, it's awful. And so then my favorite way to try to detox from heroin was to drink. So then I would be like, okay, well, I just need to drink to get through the kick. And then I would just keep drinking and keep drinking and keep drinking until would, like, buy fifths of vodka and just drink until I passed out and wake up, and drink until I passed out and wake up, and drink until I passed out and wake up. And My stomach just grumbled. Sorry. I was like, that was really loud.
I didn't hear it.
And like that lifestyle is also, you can't maintain that. Like I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't remember like what was going on. I remember coming home, like I had been out with a friend of mine and I came home the next morning and my mom was like, where were you? And I was like, I have no idea. Like genuinely, I have absolutely no idea where I was, who I was with, like what happened. I don't know. And it was literally, my life was like, I would wake up and I wouldn't know like if the sun was coming up or going down. Like it was crazy. So then, I'd be like, okay, well I have to stop drinking. And then it's like, okay, well like I feel like shit. So I'm going to use Ambien to sleep and Klonopin to get through the day. And then that would lead me back to heroin. And then when it was time to kick heroin, then I would drink. And then when I got off when I would stop drinking, then it was back to the Ambien and the Klonopin. So, you know what I mean? Like it just, I kind of like explain it as like a sliding scale. Like when it all first starts, like you don't need it every day and it's not a big problem and you're not doing crazy things to get it. So it's like when you do like the heroin or whatever, like it does take away all the things that you're feeling. Like it really does. Like it makes you feel happy and carefree and it's okay. But it's like the more crazy things that you have to do to get it, the less that like it actually covers up what you're feeling until it's like this doesn't work anymore. Because when I look in the mirror, like I feel disgusted.
Do you feel like anxiety was kind of a gateway to addiction?
Also, like I'm not from the Phoenix area. Like I came here to get sober. So like even if the things that I knew were like all bad, and they were, like I was ripped away from everything that I knew and I was in this like new place. I also have terrible social anxiety. People scare the shit out of me to this day. Like I literally, my boyfriend had to teach me how to like conversate with people because like I would just be like, nice weather. And he'd be like, ask them a question about themselves. And I'd be like, oh, right. Like, okay, that's what a normal person would do.
How long have you had hair?
Hell yeah. I really remember asking this girl because she had really nice eyebrows. And I was like, are your eyebrows real? Because people like microblade their eyebrows now. And like, you know what I mean? And I was like, why do I do these things? Like,
Why
that's
did I
so
ask
awkward.
that?
Are your eyebrows real? Like, why? Yeah, so it was really hard, like not having like the safety net of people that I knew, not having the safety net of like places that I knew. So that was all really hard. Like it was very, very terrifying for me to get to know like a fellowship of people. So because of anxiety. And then also I think like the biggest barrier that I would try to get sober and I would always fail. Like I could get sober for a while, but like I could never get past like the 6-month mark. A lot of the times I couldn't get past the 30-day mark, but it was regardless, like I definitely never got past 6 months. And I think it's just because like, you build up all these like layers and years of just like emotional trauma and baggage. And it's like you get sober and I couldn't stay sober, but I just thought the 12 steps were kind of like, kind of extreme. Like I was just like, I don't know if I need all that, So I wasn't dealing with anything. So that was, also really, really difficult is like having anxiety and trying to get sober and not being willing to like actually deal with all the things that are perpetuating the anxiety. Like, yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting, like the obstacle, like this thing that has become an obstacle now, anxiety, and you're obviously much more skilled at dealing with it now, not as huge of an obstacle, but still was big, clearly. But like it wasn't an obstacle in the beginning. So like how, you're in this early recovery part, this thing that actually affected you in later recovery or in middle recovery was more of a seemingly a non-factor or very manageable in the beginning. So like how was that? Like was it the solution was just so you were so desperate that anxiety wasn't that big of a deal? Like, or can you just
how I finally got through it was exactly what you just said, was like utter desperation. This is kind of weird, but like I remember like I would have these like overwhelming just like waves of, now I understand, anxiety, and I just like I felt like I didn't know like where to turn, and I would be like, I know what's going to make this feel better. Like, and I remember just like, I was in a halfway house, and I remember just sitting on the couch and like literally like gripping the cushions and being like, oh my God, like just let me get through this. Just let me get through this. Just let me get through this. And, but I mean, also like a big thing when I actually did get sober was like, I got a sponsor, and like I got into the 12 steps, and I started to uncover a lot of these things, like to work through some of the things that had been affecting me. And to a huge thing was like work on changing behaviors that were perpetuating the anxiety. Like I was a liar, like I was a pathological liar, and I was constantly in anxiety about getting caught in my lies. So it's like once I was able to become honest, like I didn't have to worry about getting caught in lies anymore. And then it's like I was like a manipulator and a user, and I, you know, just had relationships with people that would benefit me, and I was constantly in fear of like losing these relationships. Like I actually, this is kind of crazy. I actually thought that I was married until I was like 25 and like 5+ years sober, and I finally was like, I should probably figure out if I was married. Because my heroin dealer asked me to marry him, and I was like, oh my God, like if I say no, then I won't have dope. But I didn't have any money, so it's like I needed the dope. We actually went and got a marriage license and had it like signed and notarized and like all this stuff. So I thought I was married, but then you actually have to like go have it witnessed. So thank God, like we didn't do that. But I really thought I was married for a long time. But you know what I mean? It's like those types of relationships with people where I felt like I was constantly at the mercy of them, because like I only had relationships with people that I needed something from. So dealing with those types of behaviors, and there's like the emotional trauma and things that were affecting me, and then there was like the things that I was really realistically doing to myself because of who I was as a person. So like dealing with those things through step work, working with a sponsor, really I think made the most significant difference.
Such a testament to this program.
Yeah.
That, you know, it works. Like it is doing the work of even some of the best, you know, medical professionals might not, you know, be able to intervene at or make a change at. You know, it's just a sponsors. There's no profession. You're not a professional sponsor. You just, you know, you just are there to help and there to listen. So it's just such a testament to this program that it can work for so many different things.
One thing that I think is really important is like I chose for myself not to take medications. Like I could have had a prescription for Ativan or something. That mostly I just kind of was like, I abused benzos, so like I don't think that's a good idea. But then I had doctors who would tell me like, you know, you need antidepressants. And like I absolutely think that there are like some mental and emotional disorders that require medical attention and require therapy and require medications. So I just want to be clear, like I am not against those things at all. I just chose for myself not to do that because it felt like the anxiety arose from somewhere. And like if I was willing to like
Work through it.
persevere, it really was like persevering. It was miserable. I was absolutely miserable for like 6 months probably. And then after that, like I slowly got like a little better and a little better and a little better. And again, this is like 5 years sober. So like from the time that I had my first like severe panic attack, that was actually in, it was the month
September.
before October,
I
September.
was going to say November.
I was like, whichever month that was. It was at the end of September when I had my first really severe panic attack. And it kind of got down to like maybe once a week for like a month. And then I didn't stop having panic attacks for, I mean, consistent panic attacks probably for about a year. But for about 6 months, they were happening. Like I could almost definitely count on having like several a month.
Did your anxiety get better the more and more time you had sober?
It's so different for everybody. Like you can just never say. So I don't know, like, I'm not religious, but like definitely spiritual, which is something in the program. And I think that like, if you're in fear, you can't possibly be in faith, you know? So like, I just had like dramatic faith that I was like, I don't know how this is going to work, but like, if I just keep putting one foot in front of the other, like I'll get to the other side of this, you know? And really like, that's kind of what got me through it, was just saying like, I made it through an addiction. Like, I made it through a severely abusive relationship. Like, I can make it through this. I just have to, like, be willing to, like, do what it takes to recover from this.
You said something earlier, you know, just a few moments ago, that is something that is like almost like scientifically proven, even though it sounds like so simple. But, and I can definitely agree with, from my own experience, is like that just getting honest reduces so much anxiety, like it's absurd. And it's just like so weird how like we can induce our own anxiety by literally just telling these small little lies. You know, so this program, which is just all about honesty, like, you know, and obviously the first question is, did you drink yesterday? Or did you drink today? You know, do you want to drink again? And it's like, yeah, that is at the core, and, you know, for people to even admit that is a big step towards recovery and sobriety. But even living in sobriety and living in a life, you know, a life of being sober, like saying these small little things, like we can actually bring on so much anxiety versus just, you know, following these principles. Like,
and it really evolves too. Like, this is like the sobriety trap. Let me tell you about it. It's so, like, you're being honest about, like, just these little things. Like, did I drink today? No. Like, cool, no, I didn't drink today. It's like outright, clear-cut honesty. And then as time goes on and you, like, learn these tools, like taking inventory, and you know, your life gets a little bit more, like, full and stuff like that, then it's like, it's not so clear-cut anymore, to be honest, because, like, you also have, like, dishonesty by omission, where I'm like, I didn't lie to anybody. I didn't tell them the truth, but I didn't lie. And it's like, no, that's dishonest. And then there's, like, dishonesty by delusion, where, like, I'm lying to myself. And so it's like, you really have to, like, stay on top of, like, holding yourself accountable and, like, taking inventory of your actions and, like, reflecting on situations to be like, am I deluded? Like, do I think that I'm practicing these principles in all of my affairs when really I'm being a bitch? Like, and offending people and hurting people and, like, causing chaos where I go and in my affairs, you know? Like, you really have to look at these things, and it's like, it's not always easy situations. Like, you'll find yourself in situations where, you know, like, you just disagree with somebody on something, and it's like, okay, there's nothing wrong with disagreeing with somebody. Like, people are allowed to have different opinions and stuff, but then it gets to the point where it's like, okay, but, like, am I deluding myself into thinking that I was having, like, just an honest conversation when actually, like, I was being a dick because they don't believe what I believe? You know, like, it's really interesting. Like, honesty goes deep. Yeah.
well, and I think that's why they started off so simple. You know, because we're preparing for this lifetime of making that conscious decision to be as honest as we possibly can, even in those tough situations.
I just had this situation where I went on vacation with my family, like, a couple weeks ago, and I got into a fight with my mom. On the way home, like, afterwards, like, I was talking to my boyfriend, and I was, like, telling him, like, all the reasons why I felt justified in, like, not apologizing to her. And I was like, yeah, and I just feel like on principle, like, I shouldn't have to do this or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And, like, as I talked through it, I was like, no, like, I'm just being fucking petty. Like, I just don't want to apologize to my mom because, like, my mom and I have a really complicated relationship, and I just kind of wanted her to, like, be wrong and me for, like, be right. And I, like, finally worked around to that, and I was like, shit, I'm going to call my mom and apologize. And I did, yeah, literally, like, that was on, like, the second day of a 3-day trip. And so, like, we got over it. Like, we were, like, technically fine for, like, that night and the next day. But then, like, we left, and I started feeling, like, so guilty for, like, how I like, yelled at her, you know, and I just was, like, eating up about it. And I was like, but I shouldn't have to apologize because of this and this and this and this. And it's like, no, actually, like, I just wanted to be right in the situation. Like, I just wanted her to be wrong and for me to be right and for me to be the good guy. And I was just like, fuck. It's frustrating, too, dealing with people like my family. Like, none of them are in recovery, you know, and, like, they don't have to do the things that I do where I have to, like, examine my motives and, like, look at, you know, my intentions and stuff like that in situations. So, like, my mom literally, like, caused this fight. And she did. Like, I see where I was wrong in the situation, but she still hasn't apologized to me. Like, and she probably never will. And like that was also one of the reasons why I was like, I'm not going to apologize, because she never apologizes. So, but I mean, I did anyway, and I was just like, you know what, like at the end of the day, like I can be better than that, and there's no reason really to like be so connected to like being petty when it's like I could be better.
Well, and I mean, the crazy thing too, they talk about, I feel like some of this stuff should be like scientifically proven because it has such an effect. That honesty reduces anxiety. But this other thing, that forgiveness reduces resentment.
Yeah.
Forgiveness reduces, or apologizing reduces anger. It's just like so weird that something that like as simple as, what you're saying is doing the reflection and then just saying, hey, this is my side, and I'm, sorry that it went this way. How much that, can actually.
What's really crazy too is like, to circle back on like the stuff that was happening with my ex that really like caused a lot of the like severe anxiety issues, is like, I always was like, you're doing this to me. Like, you're doing this to me. You're doing this to me. And then I couldn't forgive him. And I was like so angry at him. And then I started doing CODA, and it was like, in CODA, you learn all about how actually people don't do shit to you, and you do everything.
You do everything to you.
Yeah. Like my sponsor, I would be like, he did this, and she'd be like, no, you allowed him to do this. And I was like, no, wait, you don't understand. Like, let me re-explain it. And she was like, no, like, you allow the way people treat you. Like, you dictate the relationships that you have. You're in control of whether or not you leave that relationship. Like, you're choosing to stay. And I was just like, that seems wrong. Like, I don't know. Easy to be the victim. Like, it is so easy. But then it's like, I was like enraged, and I was like, you ruined my life. Like, on all this stuff. And then as soon as I was able to, I hadn't even forgiven him yet. But as soon as I was able to accept that, like, I was responsible for the way that I acted in that relationship, immediately the resentment was like gone. It was crazy. It was like I had this like epiphany, and I woke up the next day and I like wasn't angry anymore. It's crazy. So it's like forgiveness, yeah, but even like acceptance, like even like coming to like the place where you can just be like, I don't agree with this, but like I can accept it. Then it's like, what's left to fight?
What would you say to someone who is dealing with anxiety and is trying to recover from addiction to substances?
Yeah, I would say my biggest advice to anybody that suffers with anxiety and sobriety is to find what works for you, really. And I'm a big supporter of like working a program that feels authentic to like who I am, So like for me, I chose not to go the medication route, but I tried therapy and things like Codependence Anonymous and step work with a sponsor and a lot of other things too. Like I tried exercising and meditating, and I really like explored like ways that I could help myself get through this, and I talked about it a lot. And that's my experience. And then one of my very best friends also has severe anxiety, and she chooses to take antidepressants. And she does therapy, and other things with that too. So it's like, I just like encourage people to know, like anxiety is a manageable thing if you're putting in the work that it takes to find, like what helps you through it. I would just say like, involve a medical doctor if that feels right to you. Involve a therapist if that feels right to you. If medication feels right to you, like, okay, just be accountable to like what's going on with you and your mental and emotional well-being as you like take that journey, certainly, because it's easy to fall into like the trap of saying like, I'm just taking this Xanax because it helps my anxiety. And then the next thing you know, you're like hardcore addicted to Xanax, but like, that's why I'm saying like always be accountable to like what's going on in that journey. But like, I definitely encourage people to like do what you need to take care of yourself basically and figure out what that looks like.